Tensions in the West Philippine Sea have just hit a dangerous new high. After a series of violent clashes and direct attacks by Chinese forces against Philippine vessels in the Ayungin Shoal, the United States has made its move. And it is massive. Steaming into the disputed waters of the South China Sea is the U.S. Navy's only forward-deployed aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, backed by a formidable carrier strike group. It's an armada carrying billions of dollars in lethal hardware, and its presence sends one unmistakable message to Beijing: enough. But how do we get here? What exactly happened at the Ayungin Shoal that forced the Pentagon to deploy one of its most powerful warships to America's oldest ally in Asia? And more importantly, are we looking at the spark that could ignite a wider conflict in the Pacific? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are breaking down the terrifying escalation in the West Philippine Sea, the tactical layout of the US Armada now patrolling these waters, and what this means for the global balance of power. Hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. To understand the gravity of this deployment, we have to look at the catalyst. For months, the Ayungin Shoal, also known as Second Thomas Shoal, has been a flashpoint. Sitting just 105 nautical miles off the Philippine province of Palawan, it is well within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Guarding it is the BRP Sierra Madre, a rusting World War II-era ship intentionally grounded by the Philippines in 1999 to serve as a military outpost. The handful of Marines stationed on this crumbling vessel rely entirely on resupply missions for food, water, and building materials. But Beijing, claiming virtually the entire South China Sea under its unrecognized 10-dash line, has decided to starve them out. Things went from aggressive posturing to outright violence. Chinese Coast Guard vessels, backed by a shadow fleet of maritime militia, launched coordinated attacks against Philippine resupply forces. We saw dangerous ramming maneuvers, the deployment of blinding lasers, and the brutal use of military-grade water cannons that shattered the windshields of Philippine boats, injuring the sailors inside. In recent escalations, Chinese personnel even wielded bladed weapons, physically boarding and puncturing Philippine rubber boats in a chaotic melee that shocked the international community. The Philippines, operating with limited naval assets, held the line, but Manila was clear. The aggression was escalating to a point where lives were in imminent danger, and Washington was watching. Under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, the United States is obligated to defend the Philippines if its armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft come under armed attack anywhere in the South China Sea. The Biden administration and the Pentagon have repeatedly stated that this commitment is ironclad. Words are one thing. 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered diplomacy is another. Following the clashes, the USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group altered its posture, steaming directly into the South China Sea. Having recently replaced the USS Ronald Reagan as America's forward-deployed carrier in Japan, the George Washington is the apex predator of the seas. Let's talk about what China is currently staring down. The George Washington doesn't travel alone. This armada includes guided missile cruisers and a screen of Arleigh Burke-class destroyers equipped with the Aegis combat system, capable of tracking and destroying targets hundreds of miles away. Lurking beneath the waves are likely one or more nuclear-powered attack submarines. But the real teeth of this armada is Carrier Air Wing 5. The George Washington brings fifth-generation air power to the theater, loaded with F-35C stealth fighters, E-2D advanced Hawkeye radar planes, and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. By sailing this strike group through these disputed waters, the U.S. Navy is establishing sea control and demonstrating to Beijing that the U.S. military can and will operate wherever international law allows. It provides an immediate security umbrella over Philippine forces, forcing the Chinese Coast Guard to think twice before ramming a wooden supply boat while U.S. stealth fighters loiter at 30,000 feet. Of course, Beijing is not backing down quietly. The arrival of an American carrier strike group in what China considers its backyard has triggered a furious response from the Chinese Communist Party. Almost immediately after the US Armada entered the region, the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, deployed its own assets to shadow the American fleet. Chinese Type 055 destroyers and Type 052D guided missile destroyers routinely tail U.S. carrier groups, gathering electronic intelligence and broadcasting warnings over maritime radio frequencies. Beijing's foreign ministry has condemned the U.S. deployment, accusing Washington of flexing its muscles and destabilizing the region. But the hypocrisy is glaring. China has spent the last decade building massive artificial islands in the South China Sea, militarizing them with anti-ship missiles, radar domes, and bomber runways. This is the geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century. China uses its Coast Guard and militia, a gray zone tactic, to bully neighbors like the Philippines without technically starting a war. But the presence of the USS George Washington flips the script. It forces China to face standard, conventional military deterrence. If Beijing miscalculates and fires on a Philippine or American asset, it triggers a treaty response that brings the full might of the U.S. military crashing down. So, what happens next? For the brave Philippine Marines stationed on the BRP Sierra Madre, the U.S. presence provides critical breathing room. Resupply missions can proceed with a massive over-the-horizon deterrent. But the South China Sea remains a powder keg. Over $3 trillion in global trade passes through these waters every single year. The fight for the Ayungin Shoal isn't just about a rusted ship on a reef. It is about whether the world will be governed by international law or by brute force and illegal maritime claims. The USS George Washington is there to ensure the former. But the standoff is far from over. As long as China refuses to recognize the 2016 Hague ruling that invalidated its claims, and as long as the Philippines refuses to yield its sovereign territory, the friction will continue. The US Armada is on station, and the world is watching. But we want to know what you think. Will the presence of the USS George Washington force China to back down in the West Philippine Sea? Or are we inching closer to a direct superpower conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update on global defense news. Until next time, stay informed, and thanks for watching.